All right.
Earmuffs, everybody.
All right, we are now recording. Welcome. Happy Monday morning, July 8th. Can you believe it? Holy cow. Hopefully you had a good weekend, recovered from your, some of you, an extended 4th of July weekend. Hopefully that provided some rest and relaxation for you. Have several things today I want to cover on the call, so I'm going to get after it so we don't, in fact, before I forget, I am going to put my little time monitor on here to make sure we stay on track. You know, I was looking at Clint for a minute there. I'm like, man, that guy is very stoic. He hasn't even flinched a muscle, but apparently it's a still shot. All right, we have, as we speak, 57 minutes. All right. All right, so let's start this off like I try every time we meet. Anybody have any, I'll put it in two categories, a contractual negotiation deal win or a contractual negotiation deal interesting story? Come on, I know somebody's had one.
This might be a good time for Clint to ask you a question.
Am I being blindsided? Is that what's going on here?
No, it's just interesting.
Okay.
No, it's just if you read the division newsletter that came out in the email last week, they contradict the settlement by saying that the best case scenario, you try to get the buyer broker signed early. If not, the minimum requirement is to have it signed before you write the offer. That's from the division newsletter.
Wow.
Sounds like the good
Okay,
old
so
days.
basically what you did is add a task to my task list this week, because I literally, I think I've shared it on this call several years ago. They said, no, you're to have it when agency starts and you're to reaffirm it when you write an offer. So yeah, well, we did get a new director. Maybe there is new blood or something that I'm not aware of. I'm glad you raised that. I will do some research this week and get back to you guys with a more solid answer. Listen, the DRE is not above reproach, right? They don't always get things 100% right. And just remember this, there's always two components, right, to be concerned about primarily as agents. One is your licensure, which they do control. And the other one is civil litigation, which they don't control. And of the two, having had experience in both, I tend to think the civil litigation is more nefarious. It's tougher to deal with unless you do something really bad and they yank your license. So again, I'm not trying to say one is more important than the other. I'm just saying the civil litigation tends to have a longer cycle and more potential ramifications. So coming to your point, Clint,
I just linked it in chat so you can see it, Matt.
Okay. But to the point is, even if the DRE said, well, you don't actually have to have it, I'm here to tell you from a current lawsuit that we have right now, by not having agency, you've opened yourself up to litigation. Is that succinct enough?
No, totally agree with you.
So I don't ever believe in pushing the envelope when it comes to legal, contractual, regulatory items. Our company and I, as the principal broker, will always manage towards what is the best practice, not, hey, and I know you're not proposing this, but what is the minimum we should do? And I find that highly disappointing that they would take that approach. So, all right, thank you for bringing that up. Good to have ears to the ground and keep us all aware of what's going on. Because you know what, you're going to get other agents that will spout stuff like that, and that's just a very naive approach to the business. So, anything else? Anybody have any other interesting deals? Dan, I can't believe you haven't had one interesting deal, one win, one contractual challenge, one anything. Carrie.
Man, put me on the spot. Just signed on 2 seconds ago. Interesting deals, huh?
Yeah, we're talking about wins or interesting contractual deals or things that you ran across in the past 2 weeks or so.
Give me a minute. I'll think of something.
All right. Okay, well, so maybe it's because we had the 4th of July and everybody's still just punchy from all the fireworks going off. I wanted to make a reminder for you guys on this call. Who raise your hand if you know who Jack Miller is? Wow. Okay. Oh, James, you and your dog, you're always stealing the show. That's awesome. What a loving dog. Hey, so this Wednesday, let me see if I can pull this up on screen. I'm going to share my screen here with you guys. Share. There we go. Pull this over here. So Jack Miller is the president and the CEO of T360. And he is, and I'm going to ask Daryl if he can, if you have the link, Daryl, if you can post that in the chat so everybody can copy that into their calendar. So as part of Gold Nation, of which we are members, and I hope you see that as a value, we get things like this that other people in the industry do not get. And this, Jack Miller's very much in the thick of all things going on in the real estate industry. T360 is one, if not the top, one of the top consultants in the industry, knows what's going on, has their fingers in all the pies. And he gave us an update about 3 months ago, and this is the next sequence in this is kind of what's going on. It's not just, hey, what's going on with the lawsuit, but it's kind of like, and here's what you as agents, we think you should be doing in anticipation of whatever may come about or may not come about. So interesting little fact while we're talking about that. So everybody knows there's this big settlement, the push for a national settlement, right? And some companies were excluded just because of the amount of production that they did. Certainly RE/MAX was, I don't know, dang near prophetic. They kind of saw the writing on the wall. They settled early and got essentially indemnification from future lawsuits, which was a great move for all of us as practitioners. We are the beneficiaries of that. But recently, a few of the states, for instance, Washington State pulled out of the settlement, and they're basically taking the DOJ to court to say that the proposed solution is anti-competitive antitrust, which just, that's entertaining on its own, the fact that somebody is turning around and suing the DOJ that their proposed settlement is anti-competitive antitrust. And the basic argument is we're already doing many of the things that were talked about, and you're adding additional layers that will be antitrust, anti-competitive. For instance, hiding the amount of cooperative compensation offered by a seller. So I don't know where that's going to land legally. That there's a lot of distance to go about in the court system. I've had this question from a lot of agents going, oh, so when August comes, because that's when supposedly the settlement is supposed to be ratified, what does it mean? And I keep telling agents, we've had this discussion a lot internally. There's a lot of yardage to go before we even get to understanding if there is not an actual settlement, especially when you have states like Washington turning around and suing the DOJ. So since we don't have a sales meeting this month, you probably have a free block on Wednesday, I would guess. And if you can make the time, schedule it in your calendar. I think that hour would be well worth your time being on that call. All right, that was the little piece of housekeeping I had. Wanted to follow up on one of the things we covered 2 weeks ago. I gave you Mr. Ron Snow's definition of win, right? What does it stand for? Yes, Savannah.
What's important now?
You know what? It sounds so simple, but we don't often govern our day-to-day business that way. What's important now? By the way, Jake, dude, your on-screen contact information, that is sick. That's awesome. Nice work. Anyway, what's important now really should be a mantra that is always going through our head. It's just a reminder to prioritize what we do in our day. I've run across so many agents over the years that are busier than all get out. but they're not really moving the needle because they're not managing to what's important now. They do busy work to make themselves feel better. And some of the things I mentioned on our last call was, yeah, properties listed and or under contract, that should be your top priority. Get those things across the finish line. Second one, do you have a plan to stay forefront of mind with your SOI? I'm not going to go into all these in detail. This is just a reminder. Number 3, are you having real estate conversations when? Daily, multiple daily. If not, you need to retool and rethink how you're doing this, because without conversations, you're not going to get transactions. Fourth one, are you practicing and polishing your skill sets? So good job, you're here today, you can check that box. And the fifth one is commit today to start using that WIN acronym. Prioritize your days, get in the morning, and figure out what's important now. All right. I wrote on my outline today, I'm going to start a new segment each time. So we have the wins, and then there's going to be the real world. I stole that from Neil Cavuto, if any of you know his show, The Real World with Neil Cavuto. No? Okay. Well, anyway, I like to share some of the things that I've run across as a principal broker, and we had one this past week and a half that again, I'm not going to use names or, breach any confidence here, but we had a deal where one of our agents had a buyer, and they had the typical deadlines that you would think of, your due diligence and your financing and appraisal deadline. And they also had a subject to sell the buyer's residence addendum. So what does that do with our deadlines? Because you guys are all contract whizzes now. What is the deadline for your subject to the sale of the buyer's residence? What deadline is that? Anyone? You guys are killing me. I'm going to force you all to go off of mute.
Finance and appraisal deadline.
Typically, it's the last one. So what it's, good job, Terry. The default of the subject to sale of the buyer's residence says that the deadline for getting their home under contract is the later of the due diligence or the financing and appraisal deadline. In almost all contracts, that's typically the financing and appraisal deadline. And so, those were all intact. Everything, for all intents and purposes, were in good shape. We were canceling the day of the deadline, and the agent was not using our TC services, Savannah. Sad. Agent was not using our TC services, or they were and didn't talk to their TC. And they sent over a cancellation at like 11:51 a.m., well in advance of the default 5 o'clock deadline. You know what the problem was? Anyone want to venture a guess? Just take a wild stab at what the problem was. Okay, you guys are boringer than all. I don't know if that's a word, boring, or you're more boring than I'll get out this morning. They put the wrong property address. Okay, let's stop for a minute. Is that significant? Yes or no? Raise your hand if it's significant. Raise your hand if it's insignificant. I'm going to vote twice because I don't want to tilt the pot. Okay, taint the pot. It's not insignificant, but I would also say, unless the buyer and the seller have more than one property under contract that could confuse what property was being canceled, probably not going to stand up in court. Why? Why do you think it wouldn't stand up in court? Just, this isn't like the bar exam. Just venture a guess why you think that's the case.
The seller did not receive a cancellation on the property under contract and really had no obligation to notify the buyer's agent that they had screwed up.
Which
they could just march right on to retaining the earnest money or damages.
Okay, so Joyce makes a good point. Their job isn't to do our job. Our job is to do our job. Now, in fact, the agent, we do have a paper trail that the agent received it, opened at 11:51, was aware of it, and then waited until after the 5 o'clock deadline to notify our agent. And guess how they notified? They notified saying, hey, by the way, we want the $5,000 earnest money. Okay, so Joyce, you bring up a good point, and I'm not going to say you're wrong, but I'm also not going to say you're right. How's that? I'm a total fence sitter today. Why would Joyce not be right potentially? Come on, guys, let's go. D, why? Why do you think?
Trying to unmute. I think that's poor communication, period. I would follow up with an additional text right away. Did you receive our cancellation? Where are we at in the process? I would not send something and ignore it until 5. That is a huge deadline with money on the line. I would make sure I had some type of back and forth before that deadline.
Very good. Keep yourself unmuted.
Okay.
So, a follow-up question. But if this was you, and in fairness to our agent, they did verify that the other agent had received it and had opened it. They just hadn't been aware that the wrong address was there. So I want somebody, including you, to make the argument you're championing your buyer's $5,000 earnest money, and the other side said, sorry, you put the wrong property address. What is a potential comeback to that?
They know.
Is there a code of conduct issue there?
Not really, because the fiduciary that the seller's agent has is to their client, right? So they can't actually just on their own forfeit a position of their seller. So they would have to check with their seller first to communicate back, technically, right? And so Joyce's point still stands, and so I'm looking for the opportunity to take her off her throne.
Well, I'm going to add to that then. If I had to challenge the
Yep.
demand for the earnest money, I would say the cancellation form also contained the origination date. It contained the name of the seller and the buyer. And so hence the intent was clear.
Oh, there's a good
And
word.
we're not going to battle over a clerical error because all
Oh
of
man, Joyce, you are a pro. You just hit some of the key words. What was the intent, right? The key information was there, and this is what I started off with. Unless the buyer and seller, who were specified on the cancellation with the offer reference date, unless there was more than one property under contract with both of those parties, pretty hard as the seller to make the case that I had no idea what they're talking about, had the wrong address. So,
Well, and I also, oh, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
yeah, in the world of contract law, when things get litigated, there are what we call kind of like baseline or foundational doctrines, right, in contract law. And one of those is the reasonableness doctrine. Is it reasonable that everybody understood what was going on, since it had the buyer's names, the seller's names, the contract reference date, and there was a clerical issue? The courts tend to give some leniency to a clerical issue when the intent and every reasonable person knew what was going on. Right, and I am not making the case for us to be sloppy in our paperwork. We should double check and make sure that the address is correct to avoid this in the first place. But in the category of, this is what happened interesting in the last 2 weeks. Now, here's the other component of this. Guess where earnest money was held? At a title company. And so the final leverage that we used was, listen, and this is, Joyce, this is exactly what we came back with. Hey, listen, we sent this well in advance. We sent a clarifying one that came in a few minutes after the 5 o'clock deadline because they signed Pacific. They signed before 5 o'clock, but it was Pacific Standard Time. The contract defaults to Mountain Standard Time, so we're off by an hour. But we also pointed out to them, I had the agent do this. I said, hey, you kind of created the mess. You get to help clean it up. If I need to jump in, I will. But just go make the case to the other agent. Hey, listen, this isn't going to stand up in court, right? The title companies, if we contest this, it's going to get interpled to a court. If you don't know what that is, it's basically the title company saying we have no jurisdiction, so we're going to turn it over to a court, and we'll let the court decide. And that's about between a $300-400 fee just to interplead it to a court. And then the final point I had the agent make was, we just want our earnest money back. You haven't been harmed, right? If we had canceled with the right property address. It was done on time with the right people specified in the right fashion for the right reasons. So it's going to be very hard for you in court to make the case for one of your two pillars that is required. Yes, we would be the liable party, but would you have been harmed? Were there actual damages? And you're going to have a hard time making that case. And when you don't make that case, then section 17 of the contract, which is attorney's fees and legal fees, are going to be added to your seller for contesting something they shouldn't have, right? And that was the final thing where they said, yeah, we're not going to fight it. And they signed off on an earnest money resolution form, and we got the earnest money back and onto another property. So,
Well, and Matt, if another point too, is if all parties still wanted to make this happen, maybe 48 hours prior to that firm deadline, a extension request should have been submitted.
sure.
With then that if this extension request is not accepted, the buyer will cancel.
Also known as a contingent cancellation form that is supplied
Yeah.
to us by UAR. It's a great form. All right. So just in the category of interesting things, pay attention to your people, your dates, and your addresses. It just avoids a lot of headache. Did we land in the right spot? Yes. Did we spend half of a day having communication we didn't necessarily have to have? Yes, we did. So just a reminder. Okay. Moving on, I wanted to talk today about, we've touched on this a little bit in the past. I wanted to get a little more granular with it today. There's two things that I want to cover before we're done. The first one is just the additive nature of contracts, addenda, counteroffers. And to kind of start that conversation off, I'm going to once again share my screen and pull something up here. All right, here is our default standard UAR addendum / counteroffer. Okay. Actually, before we do that, I just thought of one other thing I wanted to show you that will probably be more important as we have this discussion. So if we go to the REPC, section 9, we all know this section, right? It's the addenda section. But it's important we understand actually what it says here. There are or are not addenda to the REPC containing additional terms. If there are, the terms of the following addenda are incorporated. This is a part, a lot of agents out there, not our agents, of course, but outside agents, they are incorporated into the REPC. What in real world terms, what does that mean that it's incorporated into the REPC?
It's part of
a significant term.
It's now part of the REPC.
It's as if it's a numbered page in the REPC. It doesn't
Yeah.
stand on its own. And where we see this kind of manifest itself in a bad way is when, and I know many of you have had this, you send out an offer with an addendum or two, and the seller sends it back. We accept the REPC, we reject addendum 1, and we accept addendum 2. Can you do that?
Matt, let's use the brokerage commission addendum as an example.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people in the MLS are offering 2.5%. Right? I encourage my agents to go for a 3%, even though there's no set value. So a lot of times my agents will send out the commission addendum brokerage, or sorry, I forgot the name of it, guys. I apologize.
Payment addendum.
Thank you. The brokerage payment addendum. And what will happen is they'll get a response. I mean, I just had this a couple of days ago. We got a response. The offer is accepted. The addendum is rejected. Now I had put.
Wait. Just stop.
Yeah.
Just let that hang in the air for a minute.
Yeah.
The offer was accepted. The addendum was not. Did we just read section 9? It's
exactly
all one. It's all one.
Yep.
So let me.
And I had put
this.
on section 9, Matt. I had put on section 9, addendum 2, so it was now part of or incorporated into the purchase contract.
Yeah. And so here's the point, and I hope we all know this. When you put something in section 9, you check the box, you say, yes, there are, and it's addendum 1, or it's addendum 2, or other. by the way, even though this section is labeled addenda, could I check the box other and put in parentheses exhibit 1, and exhibit 1 is a copy of the listing, therefore all the terms in the listing are incorporated into the contract? Huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Be careful if you get an offer like that, because they do become terms of the contract, everything that's in the listing, right? And that may not seem like a big deal until there's water rights, or there's security systems, or there's solar panels, or the list goes on and on. By default, what's in the MLS doesn't automatically flow into the contract. We all know this, right? I hope we all know this. It doesn't just
Yes.
flow in.
So, I mean, you would really want to specifically mark that there are addendum, and then you would want to mark that the other, and then you would want to mark exhibit 1. And would you write on the MLS, like this is exhibit 1?
Yes, Dan, you label it exhibit 1.
Just to tie it all in together, because I think a lot of people do send over a copy of the MLS with their offers, and I've always wondered why, but like I've never seen Section 9 used to tie that MLS listing in. And so I'm like, I don't know why you're including this, because nothing's initialed, nothing's tying in anything. It's
Yeah.
just a copy of something that I posted on the internet. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. I've never thought about that, Matt.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because yes, agents do send over a copy as if it's like some implicit tying to the listing. And I'm sorry, it just isn't. In the world of contracts, it's all about this is another legal doctrine, the four corners of the contract, what is explicitly called out in the contract. So just because I put a piece of paper with it doesn't necessarily, we're going to use the contract term, incorporate it into the document. However, if we go to section 9 and we say other, and we say exhibit 1 and a copy of the listing is labeled exhibit 1, now it is incorporated into the contract. It's got teeth. So good little things to remember for when you're representing a buyer, or when you get offers, a seller, or when you are representing a buyer to get yourself additional leverage. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure we were clear that it does get incorporated. And so the takeaway from that, the bottom line is simply this: whatever is in the REPC and anything else checked in section 9 becomes an offer. It's like it's in a locked case, and the only choice a buyer has to do at that point, a seller has to do at that point, is to either accept it in totality, reject it in totality, or do a counter offer to modify it in totality. You get the key word I'm emphasizing there? Totality. Word of the day. You're welcome. Okay, so let's get back to the blank addendum. So there's basically two areas I want to concentrate. This is true of all of our counteroffers that anybody who uses the UAR form there, you can see I've got red number 1 here. It says, hey, listen, for anybody participating in this contract, the offer with a reference date of such and such, including all prior addenda and counteroffers. Okay, so it gives you a good exhaustive list regarding the property at such and such. The following terms are hereby incorporated as part of that REPC. So if you sign this page, everything else that went before, plus what's here in this section, now becomes part of the contract. Further, in section 2, or it's not really section 2, I just labeled it 2. To the extent the terms of this addendum, this specific page, modify or conflict with any provisions of the REPC, including all prior addenda, counteroffers, these terms shall control, meaning these terms in this document shall control. All other terms of the REPC, including all prior addenda, counteroffers not modified by this addendum, shall remain the same. So the only reason not the only reason, one of the reasons I drive this point home is because I get all the time in addenda a statement that is completely redundant. They down somewhere in here says all other terms to remain the same. I'm like, do you realize it just says that quite literally right here? So does it hurt to be redundant? No, but do you need to put that statement in your addenda? No. Okay, so here's where it gets a little interesting. There are terms, and I wanted to drive this point home. You know, this is pretty powerful language down in this section 2, right? But it loses some of its power when we introduce some of our laziness or sometimes ignorance or stupidity. Let me give you a couple of examples. If this, what was just stated here says everything that's in here, including what was in the REPC, shall carry forward unless what's written here contradicts what was previous, right? We're all okay with that, right? Well, what happens when somebody comes into this document and says sales price to be $512,000? Let me clue you in. Here's section, the very first page of the REPC. Is that called sales price? It's purchase price. It's a proper term of the contract. There is no, watch, I'll do this for you guys just for fun, just to prove to you. Control F, sales price. Oh, no results found. It's nowhere in the contract. So my addendum has to strike out or modify a term previously established. So obviously we should be saying purchase price to be 512,000. I know that seems mundane, but it's a point that can be argued. You did not modify the purchase price, which is the actual amount we're going to sell the home for. We all think we know what sales price is, but it doesn't really specifically address a term of the contract. Now listen.
So sorry, Matt, just to understand
going back to my argument about reasonableness, I think
didn't we start this call with a massive error?
Yeah.
I'm going to make a point here. I think you could go and litigate this, obviously, and say everybody understood sales price, purchase price, but why put yourself in that situation, Dan? Why not just be the professional, and if you're going to modify a term, use the already established term and say purchase price to be $512,000 and never have a problem in the first place. That's why I brought that up. Okay. Other ones, the other terms that I have here, down payment versus earnest money. It's not the same thing. Earnest money is a specific term of the contract. Acceptance deadline versus, come on, what is it that everybody says it wrong?
Response deadline.
Response deadline. There is no such thing, and it's acceptance deadline. And I could go on this list of terms. This is where you guys as contract professionals now should pay attention. When you see something like this, where you take somebody's name and you give it a proper contract title. Now, this is really mundane, I get it, but it demonstrates the point. Anytime you use the term buyer with a capital B from then on in the contract is referring to whoever was written in this slot. Oh, I can't highlight this. That blank right before buyer. Same thing for seller. Same thing for the offer reference date. You know, anytime you start seeing quotes, those become proper terms of the contract. Okay. So just pay attention to those. They are important. And especially when we're writing an addendum where we're trying to modify something that's already been established, make sure your terms are parallel. Don't introduce a new term to be like, well, I don't know that's what you're talking about. It didn't explicitly talk about earnest money or down payment or whatever term gets introduced. That makes sense? All right, sweet. Okay. Now, back to Parker's example. Sorry, we got derailed a little, Parker. So you use the example of putting forward an offer, and as part of the offer, which is totally legit to do, you use the brokerage payment addendum, which basically says the seller agrees to pay some of the buyer's obligation to the buyer, to the obligation the buyer has to the buyer's brokerage. And so in your scenario, the people said, yeah, we like the REPC. We just don't like having to pay anything on behalf of the buyer's obligation to their brokerage. So we're going to reject the addendum, right? We call this the Chinese menu approach. Contracts are not Chinese menus. I just say that because I had Chinese food last week. I could use any other menu. So what is the appropriate way to handle that, Parker? How polite were you to the other agent? You're muted.
I was fine. I mean, look, I want to put a deal together at the end of the day. I was fine. He rejected it, by the way. My client had already agreed to pay 3%, but I had already explained to my client before we did the addendum, look, you might be on the hook for this 0.5%. If they're not willing to do it, are you willing to do that? Yes, great. You acknowledge that through the EBB. Great.
So you had an EBB for 3%. There was 2.5% on the MLS.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. And you know what? At the end of the day, if they come back, then you and your buyer have a decision to make how to handle it, and you go forward. But hey, I believe it's always worth trying, right?
Now, let's put a little bit of spin on it. I could have called the seller's agent and said, so you've rejected this whole offer, is that right? Because it was the last addendum in the contract, right? So, hey, so I just want to explain this right, seller. You're rejecting this whole offer because of $2,500. And have you explained that to your seller? Right? I guess I could spin it that way. And, you know.
Okay, how did you handle it?
I said, okay, cool, whatever.
The juice wasn't worth the squeeze.
Well, it was $2,500, so it wasn't like that big of a deal.
Okay, so let's stop there for a second. What's another way to handle it? Yeah, go ahead, James.
If they signed the quote offer and rejected the addendum, you don't have anything.
That's correct.
Yeah, James. And that's what happened, James. That is what happened. They accepted the offer, rejected the addendum.
I want you to think like back to, I know it's all your favorite class, but in high school, college, whatever, algebra. When you have a positive and a negative multiplied by each other, what is the resultant number? It's a negative.
It's
a negative. That's very much like a rejection anywhere in quote unquote the offer, because remember the offer is in totality. If you inject a rejection anywhere in that, the whole thing's rejected. They don't get to Chinese menu, right? And it's unfortunate, honestly, guys. Most of the brokers know what they're doing. Some of them still don't. And they train their agents like, no, you can do this. I'm like, oh my gosh. We need to send you back to broker school. But you know, we try and be polite. It makes no sense to make enemies in this industry. You try and be polite, you try and educate, and if they're still intransient, then we say something polite like, hey, would it be beneficial if we got on the phone with, you know, either a UAR attorney or the DRE, and let's get this straightened out because I want to make sure I'm on solid ground too. And it's annoying because it takes a little more time, but that way you don't make enemies.
You know, James, there's an added caveat to that, which was addendums 1 and 2 before addendum 3, which was the brokerage payment addendum. Those two addendums were very favorable in terms to the seller, above asking, yada yada, all of that type of stuff, right? So when they rejected the offer, technically they were rejecting all of these other beneficial things that could happen for like $2,500.
So Parker, did you just end up resubmitting a new offer minus the broker payment addendum since they had rejected the first glob?
No, we did end up we ended up countering on one term anyway, and we went under contract to that counter. But yeah, it was
so part of that counter was to remove addendum 2 from the.
That wasn't it. I didn't put that in there. I just said, okay, they rejected that addendum, and then I went forward and moved forward with the contract.
Oh,
technically there is no contract.
You don't even have a legal contract.
That's right, James.
That's right.
So this is a good point, right? Sometimes we run across these situations where, and Parker, I appreciate you sharing this, but the caution here is that we all know that during the portion of time that something's under contract, there's always the potential that somebody, some issue, somehow gets things sideways, right? And when it gets sideways and they start looking more closely at things, and even if they were off base originally, and this is to James' point, if they came back later on, and let's just say a simple one, somebody came and offered them $50,000 more for the house and they want out of your contract, even though your terms were initially favorable. Can
What
they
contract?
can they come back and say, oh, we never accepted the first one? I mean, you're right, because we rejected one of the addenda, therefore we rejected the whole thing. We're not under contract.
Yeah, 100%.
So to protect our clients, may want to consider how to clean that up. Like a new counter that says all parties agree that the REPC pages 1 through 6, addendum 1, addendum 3, blah, 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 and this addendum are deemed an accepted offer. Can we do that? Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
All day
Yeah.
long. But
And
don't just go on the
also-
assumption, but don't just go on the assumption that since they didn't raise an issue about, rejecting the whole offer, doesn't mean they can't in the future.
Well,
Right?
it's also important to note that once it's closed, then whether it was or wasn't accepted is irrelevant.
For sure. To James' point,
Interesting.
I talk to the office managers and TCs about this all the time. This is why we put such an emphasis in getting your documents into the company before it closes, is because that's when we can actually affect change. We can reduce risk, because once you go to settlement and sign settlement statements and it closes, for all intents and purposes, the REPC is replaced with the new deed of trust. It goes away. That's why in certain spots or certain addenda, you will see, the verbiage, the phrasing that says shall extend beyond closing, because the default nature is once it settles and closes, these terms go away unless it specifically says it goes beyond settlement and closing. So it's a good point, and this was a shout out for our office managers who do such a ridiculously fabulous job. Sometimes I know they tell me, I don't want to be a thorn in the side of the agent. I'm like, well, you can either be a little thorn, or something can go to legal proceedings and then have people be really hot and bothered saying, how come nobody told me? And unfortunately, sometimes that's their job. So if they ever do call you and say, hey, listen, I'm trying to help you guys out. I need this document so that we can reduce the risk on this file. Please cooperate with them. They really are doing it out of looking out for your best interests and reducing possible risk to you, your client, and the company.
Yeah, for the record, Savannah, I would prefer you be a thorn in my side than a freaking dagger in my heart when I have to pay.
Yeah, right.
Because of a
Deal.
lawsuit. So,
That's what I'm here for.
yeah.
Okay, so to put a bow on this, please make sure when we're dealing with addenda, and I'm going to go one layer deep on this before we wrap up this little segment and give me the last few minutes for my last topic. So what happens if you go under contract? Let's just say it's a REPC and addendum 1. Everybody signs by the acceptance deadline, and you're under contract. And then the other side goes, oh my gosh, we forgot a term. Fill in the blank. It's X, whatever X is. And they send over an addendum, right? And for your client to sign, and your client says, nah, rejecting it. What is the nature of our offer?
You're still under contract.
To the last accepted deadline, or to the last accepted terms. Just because somebody puts forth an addendum that doesn't get incorporated doesn't wipe out the original deal. Okay? Can you counter that addendum?
I mean, you could.
Of course you can.
You can counter anything. But again, until something's accepted.
Was
like
that a
there's-
Meet the Fokker reference?
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit. No, you can counter anything. That doesn't mean the other party has to accept, right? And again, just as you said, the previously accepted terms are adherent. So you just move forward.
The first section is already set in stone. There's no
Yeah.
obligation, no requirement at all to further amend it. If somebody puts forward an amendment, you can do just like another offer. You can accept it, you can reject it, or you can counteroffer it. And if you did counter it, and then they eventually signed, then yes, those terms are now incorporated into the original REPC. But until then, it's just an interesting sideshow.
So a resolution of due diligence would be a great example of this, right? You're under contract, everything's moving forward. You go through your due diligence. Now you have to draft a resolution of due diligence.
It's a great
Right.
example. It's probably one of the most common ones.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so your seller, the default nature of our purchase contract is as is, section 10.2. So, and I'm going to editorialize for a minute. Please be prepared to defend your seller politely. Like we said, we always want to try and keep the deal on track, but when a buyer puts forward an offer, this REPC with its language, it's their language. It's the buyer's language. They're the ones that are putting forward an offer that says, hey, our offer is for the property in its as-is condition. Now, Parker, you started this off by, yeah, we want to try and keep
Sure.
deals on track for sure. I don't believe in being like territorial and just going for the win because we can. The win is to get it across the finish line and make sure both parties are happy and you get paid. But that also means doesn't mean we should not have the ability, the mindset to be like, hey, this was your offer. You said it's as is. I will, of course, present a due diligence resolution addendum to my seller, but I'm probably going to tell the agent on the other side politely as I say that, say, yes, I will, but remember, this was your offer. Your offer was in as-is condition. So if my sellers come back, that's really them just being nice, right? Because they're not obligated. I just want to start from that place so that they don't have this false impression that somehow my sellers are obligated to do X, Y, and Z. And frankly, a lot of times that's what it feels like in the deals we're involved with, that somehow the seller has to do these things. No, they don't. Okay. All right. So just remember I think sometimes people hear the word addendum and they don't think it's that significant. It is contractually significant. How we do it is significant. Responding, accepting by the deadline is significant. Using the proper terms in the contract are significant. I don't know, getting the address correct, probably significant. And so this is just a reminder for us to be, let's be pros. Let's be pros at our craft. And if you see it come from the other side, don't be that agent, tell your seller or buyer, whoever you represent, and be like, hey, listen, they kind of messed up. We can sit here and play the game, which usually leads to an argument, which potentially leads to litigation. My job is to protect you, to get the deal done. So I suggest we notify the other side that they did something wrong, right? And then proactively reach out. Be a good egg, keep a deal on track. It's much easier to solve problems in almost all instances by that approach than waiting till 5 o'clock and being like, ha, gotcha, right? That just doesn't forge good relationships and tends to not land well in most of the situations I've ever dealt with. Okay. Any questions on that? Make sense? Clear? Sweet. Carrie, you feeling good? Or did we lose you?
So good. Yes,
All
thank
right.
you.
Good deal. All right. So listen, a while ago, month and a half, 2 months ago, we had the opportunity as part of Gold Nation through their Motivate, Educate, and Collaborate. So when you see MEC on our calendar, understand that's what it is. Motivate, Educate, Collaborate. We had Travis Robertson on a call, and it had to deal with kind of the new mindset and the confusion some people are having about commissions, especially dealing with sellers and what we should and what we shouldn't be saying. And I'm not going to go in the remaining time that we have here into an exhaustive dissecting of everything he covered, but I am happy to send to each of you on the call today, if you send me an email, a copy of this script from some of his training. Before I jump into this, let me just show you this. Yeah, easier said than done. Here we go. All right. When we had that training, he opened the door for us to purchase some additional training. And I just wanted to show you on screen some of the stuff that we have. So he had a 2024 Commission Summit, which is showing on my screen here. You guys can see that, right? Okay, thanks, Savannah and Dan. Appreciate you being here today. These are the different sections on this. he also had the seller side commission training, bonus library on negotiation and objections. And so for instance, I love this one, right? How to never negotiate your commission. And there's 4 parts to it. So I wanted to pull up on screen just the one that he dealt with specifically on our call, which was listing agent commission script for 2024. I'm going to go fast through this because we have all of like 7 minutes, but here's my challenge to each of you on the call. If you want to get better at your craft, right? Because you all have time set aside every week to sharpen the saw, get better at your craft, right? This is a good dialogue. If you've never listened to Travis Robertson, he's a very like down-to-earth dude. He's not like, I don't know, highfalutin, theoretical. It's very much in the trenches type dialogue. And so this is his kind of brain dump from his mind of how he would approach sellers who have paid attention in the last 6 to 12 months and have heard that there are some issues in regards to commission, although they can't exactly articulate it. I think this is a great script for you to read through, make it your own. I've highlighted some of the red areas, which I call fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the green areas, which I think is positive ways to say things that sometimes are difficult. So the first red section, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so easier for everybody.
Matt, not to interrupt too much because I know you have limited time, but I'd love to know how many people have actually gotten questions about commissions since all this has happened that are on the call today.
Raise your hand if your video's on. All you other slackers without your video on, we'll just assume. Yeah. You know what, Parker? I've received there. Thank you, Mike. I've received from numerous agents questions on this. Do I think it's the preponderance of sellers out there? No. Is it a significant enough number that we should be skilled on it? For sure. Okay. So this script in the red section, this script is for the more traditional or basic situation, one in which you're working to get the seller to offer compensation to the agent representing the buyer. So let's just do a quick theoretical case. Hey, Parker, I'm happy to meet with you. And Parker says to me, yeah, you know what? I know I've got to pay you, but I really need to pay the buyer's agent. Right? I understand they're supposed to pay for themselves. That's some version of that is kind of where this is landing these days. Okay. And so here is his script, and I'm going to rattle through this really fast. Okay. All right. So at this point, I just want to quickly cover how I get compensated for the work I do and how that compensation is typically paid, just so we're on the same page. And honestly, because there's quite a bit of misinformation and confusion that's been popping up around this. Now, listen, you could read that paragraph and think, oh, that was a big deal. There's actually some real genius in the way he is saying this, and this is the value of scripts. I've worked with agents now as a principal broker for 18 years, and it's funny to me, amusing, entertaining, I don't know, pick your appropriate adjective, sometimes the visceral reaction when they hear the word script. I'm not scripted. Bull crap. Everybody in their entire life is scripted. We all know there's better ways to say things and not so good ways to say things. That's the very definition of a script, right? And so when Travis starts saying this, I just want to quickly, that made it seem like a simple thing, but most people don't want to go into a thesis paper about a particular issue. They just want to get to a resolution. So just using simple things like, hey, I just want to quickly cover this, how I get compensated for what I do. And the way you say it, like taking the edge off of it, takes the seriousness off it, right? And then he says, and this is where he's making it okay for them to ask the question. Honestly, because there's been a lot of misinformation and confusion been popping up around this. Oh my gosh, the genius of putting misinformation and confusion. In case you're not reading between the lines, that's you saying to the person raising the question in a very, very polite way, you're probably wrong. It's just a really polite way of saying it. You're setting them up to be like, hey, what you probably heard is wrong. Okay. Then he goes on. The good news is I'm going to do my best to make things as simple and as clear as possible. And I want you to feel free to ask me any questions you have about things you may have heard from others. As opposed to, yeah, well, wherever you're getting your information is wrong. I mean, KSL doesn't know, or the Tribune doesn't know what they're talking about, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, people are defensive when you come at them that way. This way, just open the room like, hey, I'm here to answer any and all questions you have. It's totally okay. Doors open. Why do we do that? They stop fighting. They stop fighting at that point, because half the time when they're making statements is to get your attention to say, I've got a problem and I want you to acknowledge I've got a problem and I want you to address the problem. I just did and said it's okay, right? On to the third paragraph. First, I want to let you know that agents' commissions are not set by law, nor by rules or anything like that, which is probably a revelation for most of the public, right? Because what does most of the public think about commissions? Come on, say it.
They're
Anyone.
required.
What percentage? What is the standard commission, Parker?
There is no standard commission.
No. I'm not saying what you say.
Oh, sorry.
6%.
6%.
Yeah,
6%.
6%, 6%, 3%, 3%. Okay, so they're.
I thought that was a test, Matt. Sorry.
Good job. All right. I love how he addresses it here. And then he says they're simply determined by both the agent and their client coming to an agreement on the compensation for services offered. Commissions are kind of like the price of a home. They're open to negotiations by both parties, and both parties can agree to the terms or they cannot agree. I just took the edge off. It's going to be okay to say no. Why in the world would I concede that point up front? Isn't that kind of defeatist? Aren't I setting myself up for failure? It's just the opposite, because I'm then going to build up the value pyramid to where they're going to feel pretty silly if they don't pay for my services, right? Okay, so we're almost out of time here, and I love this sense. Makes sense, right? There's a lot of versions to this, but some type of statement like, does this make sense? You good with this? Whatever your vernacular is. Then he goes on, great. So the good news is, oh, a little trickeration there, using the good news trick. So the good news is, for all the listings I just laid out for you, my fee is just 3% of the sales price that I negotiate for you. Is that honest?
Yeah.
It is. It is. Now, our contract will call out the opportunity to raise the total brokerage fee to the company so that there is a cooperative compensation offered out. But at a bare minimum, all you have to do is pay for me and my agency. Okay. He goes on and says, now, what we need to discuss. Now, I love how he did that. And when you watch his video, he says, do not leave a pause, even though there's a break in the page here. 3% of the sales price I negotiate for you. Now, like, go right to the now. Do not leave a pause. Do not leave an opening. Do not leave the opportunity to, have angst or anything. Jump right into now. What we need to discuss, if anything, is if you're willing to offer to help offset the buyer's fees for their agents. And for sake of time, you're going to want to read through, these 1, 2, 3, and then the great section. And then he goes into a little more detail, right? And basically, by the end of it, they're feeling pretty silly if they're not going to offer out a cooperative compensation. Isn't that what we want them to do as a listing agent? Offer a cooperative compensation?
Yeah.
And then he's going to go through some potential objections and stuff like that. Listen, guys. Turn off my, let's see, how do I stop sharing? There you go. In the last minute I have here, I say this all the time. I hope it resonates. The problem in our company isn't that we don't have enough information, we don't have enough guidance, we don't have enough resource. The problem is sometimes we have too much, or that we know it's just around the corner. I can always access that information. I can always go to Dan, my broker, Julie, my broker, Neil, my broker. I can go to Matt. I can go to my office managers. Those things are all true. They're true. But until you take ownership of it yourself and incorporate it yourself, it doesn't do it. It doesn't have the intended effect. So just like this Travis Robertson script, I have a sneaky suspicion half of you are going to go away from this call going, yeah, okay, that was cool. I know I can always access it. Hopefully, at least half of you will be like, hey, that's cool. I got that for free. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I have somebody who's a consummate professional in the industry, Travis Robertson, with a lot of experience, a lot of coaching experience, done a lot of dialogues, a lot of interactions with clients and agents. And they've thought this through extensively, and they've given me a beautiful template to make my own. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to spend an hour this week or 2 hours this week making it my own. And I may even practice it. I may go to my significant other. I may go to somebody on my team. I may whatever to make sure that I've incorporated it so that when somebody asks me that question, which they'll continue to come, I'm on a listing appointment. Do I really have to offer a cooperative compensation? You don't like break out in a sweat. You don't get nervous. You're like, oh, cool. I was hoping you would, I mean, you don't say this, but your mindset is, I was hoping you were going to say this because man, am I prepared for this? And this is actually going to help me establish my value as an agent.
Matt, that information you're sending us, is that two-pronged? Is that seller and how to work with buyers who have the same concerns?
This one is just on the seller, Parker, but there's
sellers
on the buyer side. And again,
yeah.
I'm requiring you guys, I'm not sending this out to you. You're going to send an email to me. I expect you to do your part. I want to know what's my phrase for this year, Dan? I'm committed to the
success.
No, that's your training. I'm committed to the committed. I'm committed to the committed. And if you can't, type on your keyboard, matt@remaxofutah.com, please send me Travis Robertson script, then you're probably not committed. So yeah, it's stupid, but I've learned over time that just even a modicum requirement to get something shows me who's actually committed. So I appreciate you being on
this. Just really quick, I wanted to add, I found that if I mention that the mortgage revamping of Frank and Dodd, and not to get into details, but if I compare it, our commissions to the federal government getting involved in that as well, it kind of diffuses it a bit. It's just the federal government's way of trying to mess with the program.
Yeah.
Well, how do you pitch that? Do you just say this is the government's way of messing with free enterprise?
Hey, hold on a sec. You got to be careful with this, right? You have to understand in the political spectrum, there's two sides to the equation. We are typically a two-party system, so be careful what you say.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a little right of center, just a teeny bit, and so I'm not in my ivory tower. I have to guard what I say. I've got some strong feelings and stuff like that, but I also realize that I'm a business person. I represent everybody. And so you got to be mindful of their points of view. And if you say something bad about the government, they may take offense at that. Right. And so
all I say is that it's their attempt at protecting consumers, just like the mortgage revamp. Sure. I don't turn it into political. I'm just saying that it makes it more of a it's a more common activity to get involved in the business than they may
totally get it and don't disagree. I would just say this: when you find a good dialogue or script, weigh the merits of it. It's already been vetted and tested about versus, and I'm not saying don't introduce, but weigh it against introducing some of our own information. James, I think what you're saying is you have at the ready that dialogue in case it kind of goes that way. You don't lead with that per se. But there's a reason why we use successful dialogues, because they're successful. So that would be my advice to you. You guys are great. I hope your July goes well. And thanks for being on the call, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, good one, Parker. See you later.
Good.